Hey everyone, today we have a great conversation with Deputy Chief Instructor CJ Kirk discussing the latest Kravology article, Krav Maga's Blueprint, Operating in Chaos Through Simplicity. In this conversation, we tackle some of the most common critiques of Krav Maga, debunk online skepticism, and explain how this principle-based system prepares you for the unknown. But before we get into that, I want to share an incredible Krav Maga Worldwide training event coming up that you won't want to miss. From March 21st to 23rd, we're hosting a Control and Counter seminar in San Diego, an advanced hands-on training seminar featuring two of the biggest names in Krav Maga, John Pascal and CJ Kirk. John Pascal is a 6th-degree black belt and director of Krav Maga Worldwide's Force Training Division, brings 40 plus years of experience and 25 plus years in law enforcement, having trained 1,000 or more agencies and military units throughout the world. CJ Kirk, 4th-degree black belt, deputy chief instructor of Krav Maga Worldwide, podcast co-host, and founder of Krav Maga Houston, has over 30 years of martial arts experience. This seminar will thrust you into the world of control and counterattacks, teaching battle-tested techniques to dominate the tightest spaces. What makes this training even more unique? We're hosting it at Strategic Operations in San Diego, a world-class facility known for hyper-realistic, scenario-based training used by military and law enforcement. You'll face high-stress, real-world simulations that push your skills beyond anything you've experienced in a standard Krav Maga class. Whether you're a Krav Maga student looking to refine or hone your skills, an instructor aiming to refine your teaching methodology and expand your tactical knowledge, or a law enforcement officer seeking battle-ready tactics, Control and Counter will push your limits and redefine the approach to self-defense. Head over to kmwcalendar.com/control and counter to secure your spot. All right. Hey, everyone. Welcome back to the Krav Maga Worldwide Podcast. I'm one of your hosts today, Joel Ellenbecker. I'm excited to be joined again by CJ Kirk. And we're going to dive into a recent Kravology article titled Krav Maga's Blueprint, Operating in Chaos Through Simplicity. Thank you for writing such a great article, CJ. And I'm just curious as to what had you want to write it? What got your thought process going here?
Yeah, it's good to join you, Joel. And I'm glad we're talking about this. I think a longer explanation might help some people. I think one of the things that was sort of bothering me was the constant critique of Krav Maga on the internet by people who have a very shallow understanding of what violence is and how to prepare for violence. And the reason I say that is if you're critiquing a technique or defense, self-defense of some kind, and the critique revolves around something superficial like, oh, the attacker won't stay there that long, or the attacker would never do that, you're really illustrating an ignorance about violence. No one's saying that the attacker is going to stay that long. That's why you, in some cases, like turn into the fight. And when you turn into the fight, you're ready to hit them if they're there, and if not, to defend yourself. And I think that the average person who sees this doesn't understand what they're looking at because there's such an asymmetry of information between someone who's showing a defense and someone who's interested in learning self-defense. And then in the middle, there's somebody jumping in saying, oh, this will never work because the attacker won't stay there. And it's like, that's not even a relevant comment. So I wanted to write an article and ensure that there was some information somewhere out there that allowed people to understand how Krav Maga was developed, why it was developed that way, and to help them better get their arms around how to prepare for violence.
I think it's such a relevant topic, and for Krav students, instructors, school owners out there, we're constantly hearing, online or on the internet, different critiques of techniques, and we've kind of covered it on the podcast before with the systems first approach and also the difference between fighting and self-defense. But I really like how you package this together, and I think actually in conversation you had just like a quick analogy about, like, if a soldier was going to battle, what would they choose to bring with them? Do you want to elaborate on that, like that kind of thought process?
Yeah, we were talking about this. I think Tamara was with us, and I was saying the bottom line is that if you're going into battle as a soldier, for instance, as a metaphor or proxy, um, and you know you're going to potentially face violence, but you're not sure what violence or what range or how many and so on and so forth, and you can only pack so much stuff in with you, right? What are you going to pack in with you? You're going to pack the tools that are highly useful multi-tools, or are you going to take the very best thing that you can for every potential scenario, which would have you trying to drag a pack you couldn't carry into battle in the first place. And that's sort of a way of looking at how people need to prepare for violence. I think the number one thing that people don't recognize when they think about violence outside of a misunderstanding about the human condition and how, we're flooded with adrenaline and cortisol and norepinephrine and what that does to your body, the impact on your body and your ability to perform. There's a whole nother conversation to be had around doing a technique in a dojo or a school or a facility where the violence is known and responding to unknown violence and having to respond to any number of a myriad of different attacks. And so the point is that you want a tool that is as versatile as possible. And you want to be able to pack in as few tools that are as versatile as possible into what ultimately is unknown violence. The alternative is to try to optimize not a system, which is what we do, but to optimize each sort of incarnation of violence. For instance, if someone's choking you, are their arms straight? Are they bent? Are they really bent? Is it one hand? Is it two hand? And when you get into that kind of thing, your approach to self-defense expands to the point that you virtually guarantee cognitive overload in most people. And so I think there's just a fundamental misunderstanding of what Krav Maga is, what it was designed for, and why it was designed that way.
Yeah, I think too, another way of looking at another analogy is like if you go to an ice cream shop and there's like 50 different choices, for some people that's like super overwhelming. It's like, well, what do I choose here? And now imagine that, this is the worst day of your life. Someone's trying to kill you and you have to recall back to like, oh, I have 50 choices on how to defend this depending on certain variables or, what's happening, versus having a fewer amount of choices that work and cover multiple different scenarios. I don't remember if it was Houston or if it was somewhere else in the United States, but I remember quite a while back hearing a story about a Krav student who hadn't really trained a ton, and then they were mugged at gunpoint right outside their house. Probably hadn't even done handgun from the front in our system yet, but had done inside defense. So they executed inside defense, was able to punch the person in the face. There was a scramble with the gun. Bottom line is they got home safe. And it's like they didn't have to know the exact specific technique. And the tools in the system worked for various amount of things in the worst possible time in their life when someone's trying to order them into their house with a gun.
Yeah, I heard that story too. I don't think it was Houston, but I did hear it. There's stories like that virtually everywhere at this point. The way I try to explain this to people when I say a principle-based system-first approach, and it's not my idea, right? EME developed it, Darren brought it to the United States, two very, very, very intelligent, thoughtful people. And what people don't understand is principles allow you to operate in uncertainty, right? So you can't do something rote. And the way I explain is this: if I had 40 Legos that I all knew were really, really good Legos, and I put them in a box, and I took the box and I emptied on the floor, and I said to someone, all these are vetted Legos. You can use them to protect yourself, or you can use them to build things. And then I said to them, how many things do you think you can build with these 40 Legos? Well, the answer is, some astronomical, amount of stuff or buildings or structures. And that's really what Krav Maga is. Krav Maga is looking at the way that humans respond to danger, the fact that you won't always have access to fine motor skills, the fact that your IQ falls by up to 50 points, 50 points, right? The fact that you're overwhelmed with the chemical cocktail in your body. And so capturing instinctive responses that can be leveraged into powerful gross motor skills to address danger is one of the hallmarks of Krav Maga. And these Legos are akin to the movements that were designed to address danger primarily, and also to work through the principles of Krav Maga the 4 principles as they pertain to self-defense, right? And I think that there's a ton of principles we're talking about, address the danger and so on. I'm talking to people about this, and they're beginning to understand, like, okay, so I can build something that I need to build with 40 Legos and have it done quickly and know that that structure is solid. Or I can put 2,000 Legos on the ground and try to build the prettiest structure, but time expires before I'm done even sifting through what Legos I want to use to build the prettiest structure. A principle-based system-first approach is the only viable approach for men and women, big and tall, short and small, that there is. When people say, well, I do, 2-on-1, or I do wrestling, or I did it this way, or I changed the technique. I don't care I don't care what you did. I'm not even saying you can't do it. I'm saying you don't understand that Krav Maga wasn't built just for you. It was built for everybody. And for those people that think, well, Krav Maga, doesn't evolve, when you think of the Kuf Mam in the circle that's open on top and bottom, I try to tell people on the bottom, things are being fed into the system. And you can think of the bottom opening of the circle as every potential or conceivable martial response to danger, right? And the top is whether or not it makes it through that stage gate process of ensuring that the movements that make it into Krav Maga are accessible for everyone, are usable, are leverageable, and can be found in several different responses to various types of danger. That's why we're working on the Krav Maga essential movements. That's why we're building the Krav Maga family tree, which may end up being, a web or some other sort of analogy that's pictorial and visual. But people need to understand that a lot of what is going on the internet is absolute nonsense.
Yeah, and I think for me, training in Krav Maga, and even as an instructor watching my students train, the aha moment when people identify those set of Legos, when they're like, oh, these mechanics here, this position here, oh my gosh, that's the same thing as 360 defense, or that's over here. And that light bulb that happens, I think gives students, gives practitioners, gives people fighting for their lives the confidence to act. So if they know what to do and it's simple and they've done it hundreds or thousands of times in various positions, it's going to come out of them more readily under that extreme stress.
Yeah, I would even say, in regard to what you're referring to, that the defenses are, quote, sort of designed to fly from you, right? So because they're designed in the way that they are designed, um, it's almost, and in some cases is initially an instinctive response to danger. I had a student ask me one time, well, if my response to the choke is to put my hands here, then how does the pluck work? And I said, well, the pluck works because the motion of putting your hands on the choking hands starts the pluck, right? So your instinctive response reminds you of the motor skill you need to defend yourself, right? So even connecting those types of instinctive responses to the motor skills themselves um, is imperative for people when someone's trying to break your windpipe or squeeze the life out of you, right? Um, and a lot of people don't recognize that. And if you have someone sort of gently massage your windpipe with their thumb, you get the idea real quickly that you go from 0 to 150 real quick when that type of danger emerges. And when it does, that instinctive response is an inspiration, and it flies from you, and inspires you to make that defense or that response to danger.
Yeah, let's talk through. I think this example that I'm going to bring um, combines some of these things that we've been seeing online, combines some of the concerns and things that students and instructors and stuff have brought. So let's talk through this. So for me, when I went through the system in Krav Maga, I had very limited ground fighting experience, and the tools that were given to me through Krav Maga, I felt like did a good job of getting me safe and getting me back up to my feet, versus someone who like didn't know what they're doing. But then as soon as I started doing jujitsu against other people who knew how to hold me down, I felt like the techniques that I learned in Krav Maga weren't working there. So this is something I think that happens to people when they start to cross train, or this may be what people online are the experience that they're drawing from. It's like, well, that technique would never work. So let's talk through like why are we then teaching it that way if quote unquote it wouldn't work.
I think context is a huge issue, right? And I think jujitsu is fantastic. I trained jujitsu after UFC one, I think, for years. But what I want to do is I want to be able to have this small um, bag of tricks is the wrong phrase, but these motor skills, these movements that allow me to perform under stress. And if you're on a street and you're on concrete or black, yard somewhere, the context often changes as well, right? And so it's not so much that if you're on the ground with a jiu-jitsu expert, don't expect to be as good as the jiu-jitsu expert. That's not the point. Then you have to be, if you're going to look at it that way, you have to be as good as a jiu-jitsu expert on the ground. You have to be better than a judo guy if you're going to be thrown. You have to be better than a Thai boxer or a great boxer if you're going to throw strikes. It's like no one can be all things to every discipline, right? And so the question is, how can I prepare for the widest swath of violence in the shortest amount of time? And if you get through Krav Maga and you're like, oh, I did that already, then if you want to specialize in something, go ahead for sure. And you can specialize either in things like not being taken down or being on the ground. But context matters. If I'm on the ground and in fact, my middle son learned this lesson allegedly, he learned it twice, I guess. But I told him, he goes to sort of a rough school, and kids are pretty aggressive. And twice he slammed a kid to the ground, once in the schoolyard and once in the gym. And both times he mounted the kid. And while he mounted the kid, the first time he was stomped from behind in the neck. In the schoolyard, he was kicked multiple times in the face. And people tend to think about violence in the context of, oh, it's mano a mano, or woman versus woman, or we have a poor grasp of what violence really looks like when it bursts out of what we think of as like a social context, meaning this isn't how we act, right? This is counter to how civilized society works. So if you're one-on-one, that's one thing. But what if there's two people, right? What if there's three? What if there's a weapon? I had a instructor of mine go in. She does jiu-jitsu frequently. She went in with the instructor of her school, and she said, one of the things that I see about jiu-jitsu that I want to bring to you is that you're too focused. You're not aware of what's going on. There's too many assumptions that are layered into the way that you train. And her instructor said, I'm not sure what you mean. And it was a weekend. And she said, well, I'm going to put a towel stuck in my belt. And if I pull a towel out, it represents a knife. And she would quickly get to a position where she was at disadvantage, but she'd be able to, with one hand or another, pull the towel out and start hitting with the towel. And she came back and said, I'm one of the people that love jiu-jitsu, and I see it for what it is, which is amazing, but it's not everything. And I just had this experience with my instructor, and his eyes are starting to open that that not one thing can fix everything. So prepare for as much as you can. And that's usually a system first, principle based approach to self defense.
And I see it. I have a couple thoughts here, but I see it, as like a life skill where it's like learning to swim. Like if we learn to swim, then we're going to be safer if we're ever around the water. And same thing with self defense and Krav Maga. It's like if we learn how to protect ourselves, and we have this base set of knowledge that fits and is simple and can be used under stress, then like you said, specializing is great. Um, and I love jujitsu. I train it frequently, and that's the reason I brought the side mount thing. Is this week I've been working side mount escapes all week, and I'm starting to connect the dots where I'm like, all right, well, if they're leaning slightly this way on my hips, or if this arm is around my head this way, or if this arm is over on this side, it's all different movements. And I also have the benefit of I teach jujitsu and Krav at my school, so I get to see the juxtapose where it's like I do a Krav Maga class and people get done, and after that one class, they feel confident, they feel strong. They're like, man, like I could do something here. And honestly, sometimes after a jujitsu class, it's like, oh man, like I gotta keep learning. I don't even know if I got it down yet, which is great. In the long term, if they train 10 or 15 years, they're going to be so deadly in a one-on-one fight and they're going to be so effective. But the movements are all different decisions for different things. And it just takes so much more time to learn, which is another reason why Krav Maga was developed, right? Is like, let's get this information to people as quickly as we possibly can if they don't have a great amount of training time, like military and law enforcement specifically, where law enforcement doesn't have a lot of time to train. This is the most effective thing that they can do. If we asked all of the law enforcement officers to learn jujitsu, it's going to help them, but they're going to have to spend so much more time. And I don't know about you. The reality is for me that a lot of officers have crazy schedules and they don't have as much time to train as they would like.
Yeah, I think that's true. I think the other thing that's important that people don't always think about when they just, the average layperson is if the martial science that you're training in is dependent upon weight classes, then that in and of itself is telling you something about that martial science, right? Like let's just say I'm 260. Let's just go with that. If I had a 140-pound woman who was really good at jujitsu and I just laid on her, um, it would be, it would be an issue. I'm only saying that because this has happened before. Look, you brought up jiu-jitsu. We're not taking anything away from jiu-jitsu. Jiu-jitsu is fantastic. It's intricate. It's sort of the chess of the martial world, right? And um, if someone wants to train jiu-jitsu, I say, hey, more power to you. My point is that you have to have more training than just one sort of very focused style to go into battle when you just don't know what the attack's going to look like.
I think another great example here too, and I'll call myself out on this. When so I've been doing martial arts my whole life. I started out as a kid, and I feel like I'm pretty athletic and I'm quick. And so what started to happen over time with my inside defense, so defending against someone trying to punch me in the face, what started to happen with inside defense is I would bring my shoulders forward over my hips, and I'm leaning forward, and then my hands would come out further from my face because if I knew that they were throwing a straight punch, I was now setting myself up to be able to defend that straight punch much easier because I'm closer to them and my hands are way out here and then I can make the motion. But I was making most of that defense with my hands. And I think just because I'm fast and I can do it it looks relatively well. I understand how to shift my weight. I didn't get called out on it for quite a long time. And then, I trained with you at Houston last year, and we started to go, okay, look, like inside defense is what? What is it on the family tree? Like, what is it, the Lego? Like, it turns into straight stab later on. And so I was specializing in defending against straight punches by putting myself in a position where I could be successful. But then later on, when somebody had a knife in their hand and they're trying to stab me, I'm way out of position to make the defense properly.
Yeah, you're kind of getting into the second layer, if you of many layers of Krav Maga. And one of the things people often don't think about is if I make an optimal defense or even cheat the drill for that matter, with the right straight punch and an inside defense, um, is this going to cost me later, right? And there's two issues to this. The first one is how you train and why you train that way. But the second issue is if you don't understand when you're training a martial art or martial science that the Legos are going to be with you the entire time and where this Lego is going to show up again and how your performance in one defense will either hinder or enhance your performance in another defense, then you don't have enough information to um, to have an impetus or an incentive to train the way that you described, which is to move more from the elbow and the forearm. So what you're describing is hinging from the elbow and reaching with the hand, right? Which you lose your wall, right? There's a redirection there, but the redirection for the head is far smaller than the redirection for the shoulders if you're getting stabbed in the chest. So there's some implications for understanding how the motor skill is going to be utilized throughout the system. And the other implication on the other side is this, that people just don't seize on all the time. If you have one defense for a right straight punch and you have another defense for a stab, like a straight stab, that comes down that same channel, and you choose the wrong defense, you get stabbed. So in the moment, you have to decide, is this a punch? Is it a low punch coming into my collarbone or is it coming into my face? You have to decide. There's sort of like a straight looking punch coming down essentially the same channel. What attack is it? And of course, we know that most people that are attacked with knives never saw them, right? You go to the hospital and say, what was it like to be attacked by a knife? And they say, I don't know, I never saw it. I only knew afterwards I was stabbed. Then that automatically tells me, well, our inside defense and our defense to a straight stab need to be very, very, very similar. They need to operate from a similar place. The initiating movement to address the defense has to be the same, and so on and so forth. And we're getting into how the system is built now, right? Like I didn't invent that. I just noticed it. And because the system's built that way, we can use that one motor skill to defend two different attacks, two different levels of danger on the same channel that can be indistinguishable. And I think if you just seize that question, or I'm sorry, that sentence, that comment, it will become clear to you that there are many layers to this. And to try to optimize each defense is to create failure when attacks look similar.
Yeah, and I think we'll probably, as we continue to go deeper with the central movements and the family tree and things like that, we'll probably start to know exactly how many unique movements there are in Krav Maga. Because even using that example of my hand coming out too far away from my face, it's like, where else is that in Krav Maga? I don't think anywhere. It shouldn't be anywhere, right?
No, it's really not anywhere.
Where,
It doesn't really exist, Joel.
well, thank you. But keeping the elbow close to my body and coming across, I mean, this structure and this motion is really the same structure as a 360 defense. And that position of my arm shows up in many places in Krav Maga.
Yeah. And so now you're getting into like, okay, why is a 90-degree defense a 90-degree defense? What are all the benefits of that? Does it work for men and women, short and tall, big and small? Yes. I did a big seminar a couple of weeks ago. I had people reaching through their shoulder, out their elbow, with the forearm being the table where the defense was made in a 360, and attacking them with both hands, leaning on them with my body weight, and no problem. Even because of the structural integrity of the way the defense is made and the way the initiating movement sets that up for you in training, so you don't have to really think about it. So if you think about the way that you did inside defense, which is common, I mean, I've even seen some high-level instructors do this. The thing that's akin to that in 360 is sort of the chopping at the attack as it comes down on you, say from overhead, right? And so if we can learn to isolate and understand in Krav Maga what the actual movement is, right? We do that. If we can encourage our students to think of the initiating movement coming from a specific place and help them to understand, okay, this angle shouldn't change this much in your arm, and give them physical cues and markers and ideas and touch, turn, chop, but like memory minders. These things begin to pile onto themselves, and people begin to understand that they can do that defense well, and then they begin to pick up, oh, I know this motor skill, right? So now we have a common language, which we do, and we can use that language to help our students learn and understand more quickly and more effectively.
Well, and let's go back to now side mount. I was doing a video to show, like how we do a side mount escape in Krav Maga. And as I was doing it, I was thinking to myself, I was like, oh man, I have all these other thoughts in my head about how I've been doing this in jujitsu. And then I paused and I thought about it. And it's like, we're telling them to do 360 frames on the neck and the hip because they've already learned that motion. They already have those Legos. It's going to speed up their ability to not only defend themselves, but also decide what to do. Because if they get to that spot on the bottom, they're like, oh, where do I put my arms? Oh, I put them like this, like I do for everything else, versus like, oh, well, actually, now I got to do this, now I got to do that. And all that time is being wasted while they're being assaulted or attacked or injured. And it just takes so much more time to develop uh, knowing multiple decisions under stress.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing that I always come back to when I think about, you said making frames, 90-degree frames, is your performance will be degraded under stress to some level. And to the extent that it's not, two critical factors come into play. One is recognition and response. In other words, I recognize I need to do something, and having the response fly from you, right? And the response flies from you, and is similar or the same structurally and effectively because you've trained the Legos over and over again. So you've created essentially myelination or muscle memory. I think Bruce Lee said, and maybe Hitman and some of his other instructors before him had said, fear the man that trained one technique 10,000 times, not the man that's trained 10,000 techniques. And what he really was saying was, this guy's gotten really good at this one thing. And if you're kind of good at defending lots of things, then you're going to get punched in the face. And so my personal view, outside of all the great things that a system first approach and a principle based approach offers, is that myelination is one of the most important things we can do to ensure that self-defense, flies from us, and that the integrity and the efficacy of the defense is intact.
And I think the people online or on the internet or critics or skeptics who are asking these questions, I mean, it's clear to me, and I think you said it earlier, they just haven't spent as much time analyzing and practicing and testing things out under stress. That's a big part of Krav Maga, and one of our principles is to train from a position of disadvantage, allowing ourselves to be out of position, like putting ourselves in the worst case scenario, and then being able to practice and train from there as well.
Yeah, I think position of disadvantage is something we've done for a long time, and I think other martial arts might do it as well. Um, for instance, if you let somebody mount you in jiu-jitsu and you're working, escape of the mount.
Exactly.
But I think that there's a bigger implication here. That I'm writing a book, and some of the book is about Krav Maga principles and some of the things that I've noticed throughout the years and how successful people who have really deep success and contentment, and not the people that have this artificial success, whether it's money or fame or power or whatever, and then they end up, circling the toilet. How do these people operate? And I ran across, I'm going to get it wrong, so I apologize, but Josh Watkins, I'm saying the name wrong, the last name wrong, but he was a chess prodigy. I think they even made a movie about it. But he went on to do lots of things. And one of the comments he made recently on Huberman, he said that chess masters and people that are very, very good at chess, some of them think 50 to 100 moves ahead. And he goes, I don't know if that's realistic or not, right? But he said, I might think maybe 2 moves ahead. And what guides my thinking in those moves and that thought process is something that he calls MIQ. And MIQ stands for, what is the most important question that I can ask myself and answer right now to put me in a position to achieve what I want to achieve, right? And so I think what people fail to do in the martial community is understand how to ask the most important question, right? And the most important question isn't, can you show me 2,000 defenses, right? Or can you show me how cool something looks? Or can you tell me why you think this would or wouldn't work? The most important question is, how do you, as a system, address the uncertainty and the complexity, um, and the effects of sudden violence in human beings? How's that woven into your system so people can respond? And when you ask that question, you're no longer talking about any one particular defense or technique. And that shows me, okay, you've asked the most important question now, because all the other questions, whether they're answered or not, ultimately lead to failure or cognitive overload or things like that.
Yeah, I like that. Did you say MIQ, most important question?
Yeah, that's not mine. Um, Now for us in Krav Maga, that translates to something like addressing the danger and asking the question, what's the danger? And if you ask a new person on a two-hand choke, what's the danger? They're going to tell you the hands on the throat, or they're going to say being choked or being choked out or him killing you. And these are all generic answers. And most of them are results based. Well, that's what's going to happen if I don't do anything. But
Mm.
what's the danger, right? And so a long time ago, Amy was asking the most important question, which is, what's the real danger? And as you know, for a two-hand choke, it's the thumbs. And when we talk about it, I go, okay, take your thumbs away, just staple them to your hand, so to speak, metaphorically, and then try and choke somebody, and they'll laugh at you and walk away. You take the thumbs on either side and you grip on the opposing sides and you've got a hold of somebody. It's a totally different situation. But if you don't know how to ask the most important question about the danger that you're training against, and you don't know how to apply a system first mentality to that danger by looking at all the other danger, you're going to fail. And it's when you think about it in that context, the kind of elegance and genius that went into the simplicity of Krav Maga really can't be overstated. It's incredible.
Yeah, I think that's awesome. And I think too that with the rise and the popularity and the spreading of the many different martial arts and people in the media starting to do them, I think it may become a pride or an ego thing where it's like, well, I'm doing this thing, so the thing that I'm doing, has to be better. And then people are being loud about that. And there's a lot of education out there about jujitsu and MMA and some of the other martial arts. But I think at the end of the day, we just have to remember like what is the purpose of what we're doing, and for Krav Maga, the purpose is to save lives and to protect ourselves in a violent encounter. Whereas, MMA, the purpose is to get into the octagon and fight one-on-one with another person and see who's a better fighter. And jujitsu definitely has a lot of self-defense application, and it seems like that's, where it originated. But with the popularity, a lot of it is transferred over to this is a sport, and we are going to compete against other people and see who has better jujitsu versus jujitsu. Where when we're protecting ourselves, it's like we're not trying to have better martial arts versus the other person. We're just trying to get home safe.
Yeah, somebody asked me the same question one time. I did use an analogy like yours, and I said, imagine that you're training for a fight in the octagon. They're like, okay, got it. Okay, now you don't know who your opponent is. They're like, what? And it's like, well, you don't get to know ahead of time. So it could be anybody. Could be somebody much bigger. You don't have any weight classes. And they go, well, wait a minute. And I go, now imagine that they can bring weapons if they want to, and they can hide them. And they're like, well, this doesn't make any sense. Like, well, that's the point. And I said, and now imagine that their buddies, their wolf pack, can jump into the octagon anytime they want to and attack with this person, this unknown person. And I said, would that change the way you prepared for that fight? And of course, the person was like, yeah, I wouldn't even begin to know how to prepare for that fight. And I said, well, welcome to Krav Maga.
Yeah, and inside the octagon, there's going to be cars and curbs and glass on the ground or whatever else. I love that analogy. That's really great.
Yeah. I think that there's a huge amount of information on the internet that's just it's unreliable, it's wrong, it's based in ignorance. And I think that you touched on something that bothers me and I think is true, which is that people want to make the system that they're training their own.
Mm.
And so what they do is they go, oh, look at what Krav Maga is doing. Um, I know a better way to do this. And it's like, Well, I'm not saying you can't do the way you're doing it. I'm not even saying that your way might be more optimal. I'm saying that if you do it your way for every incarnation of danger, you will fail, right? And so a lot of times people get the sense of like, oh, I want to do something better. It's like, well, self-defense is binary to a large degree, right? You either survive your attack with your quality of life intact or you don't. And as long as you're teaching something where people are surviving with their quality of life intact, or that's the expectation, that's the goal for men and women, big and tall, short and small, right? Then you should keep teaching what you're teaching. But most people don't know how to get to that answer. And so what they do is they're like, well, look at me. For me, for the last 25 years, I haven't really cared to try to make Krav Maga, like to tinker with and go, this is my Krav Maga. What I've tried to do is peel back all the layers and understand it at a much deeper level and from a system mentality, um, from top down and bottom up and from the side. And what that leads to is a more firm understanding of why you're doing what you're doing, which leads to more confidence in doing that thing, which leads to more training in that thing, which leads to more myelination, which leads to more effectiveness, which takes us back to Bruce Lee. Do fewer things more times when you're sure they work, and quit trying to create a, a defense for every shade or flavor of the same attack or the same danger, because cognitive overload will meet you there pretty quickly.
Yeah, and there's so many ways. I mean, I get it. I want to learn new things. I want to experience new stuff, and I think that maybe what sets people on that path to try to tweak it and make it their own and change it. And there are things that I think people stumble upon or they make connections with that could work for them as an individual. I know you mentioned it earlier, like 2-on-1 and things with knife. No doubt there are times where that might be an option for an individual for a certain circumstance. But I go back to, my wife, Tamara, she's 5'2", and if she tries to wrestle your arm while you have a knife in it, I mean, you're going to just pick her up in the air and like it's not going to work for the big and tall, short and small. So I think that's an important thing for instructors to remember is it's like even as we learn and experience more things, we have to deliver the simple, effective thing that is going to work for everyone.
That's the goal of the system, right? And so if you want a system for um, people that are over 250 pounds that can bench press so much or squat so much or run so fast, or what, you can make that system. There's nothing wrong with that, but just be clear about what that system is. It's not a system for men and women, big and tall, short and small. Or your defense. Your defense is not a defense for men and women, big and tall, short and small. Your defense is for people like you. And I think when people begin to think of it that way, I think it'll help them a lot. It brings me to the sort of maybe one of the most important issues with people tinkering with Krav Maga, and that is people like to tinker with Krav Maga and personalize it. And there's nothing wrong if you have a trick shoulder or a chronic injury with personalizing or individualizing the motor skill so it can work for you. That's different than changing the motor skill because you happen to be fast or you happen to be big or you happen to be strong. And what I said last night is you're not the biggest, fastest, strongest person in the world. And until you are, those aren't the criteria you can use to create your defense, right? And so last night I was in class and I was demonstrating with a guy who's really fast and um, much lighter than me, probably 70 pounds lighter than me. And I said to him, what if I did this? He's like, oh, that really works. I said, no, it only worked because I was 80 or 70, let's say 40 pounds heavier than him. Let's just call it 40, right? It only works because I'm leaning on you in a way that you can't lean on me. So we can't do this. It's not that I can't do it. It's that I can't teach it. And so we get into this idea of what's your philosophy of Krav Maga? And your philosophy of Krav Maga can be thrown in a couple different buckets. One bucket is what do you do to give yourself more accessibility to the system based on some limitation that is personal, right? That's one thing. Do that. And then another bucket is when you come to a place in a defense where you have to essentially choose between two different responses that sit upon two different principles, which principle do you prioritize and why? Now we're into the third layer of Krav Maga, right? And as we peel those layers back, people begin to go through a thought exercise they haven't gone through before. And as we begin to understand more about what we believe and why and test it, it creates more confidence, it creates more training, it creates more myelination and down that same path. So I see the genius or the brilliance or the truth, really, the truth in, Bruce Lee's statement. You don't need to learn 10,000 things. I personally, Joel, I've counted the motor skills in Krav Maga, and we're right about 40, depending on how you divide them up. And so if you think about 40 Legos, 40 blocks, 40 skills that you can utilize and have been vetted and will help you against, you know, countless, innumerable types of danger. I mean, that's what you want because you don't know what danger you're going to face. And I would just say this along that line, and I'll be quiet. For those of you listening, the idea of having the system fold onto itself and making the system smaller to deal with more violence, more uncertainty is the only way to go, to the point that if we could just have one thing we did that was effective against all types of violence, that would be sort of the nirvana of the system, right? We're never going to get there. It's just not possible. But that's the question you want to ask somebody to juxtapose the two ends of this question. Do you want a martial system that's optimized for every conceivable version of every threat, and you have 2,000, or do you want a martial system that has one defense that's effective against everything? Not optimized, but effective. Well, they're going to say, give me the one thing. And I go, well, I don't have one, but I got 40. Will that do?
I don't know. I think we should put some effort into research and development, get some cool AI tech thing on our right arm, and it's just like right straight punch solves everything. It doesn't matter where you are, like you throw the right straight punch and like a rocket comes out, or whatever it is. It's just the right straight punch, CJ. I think that's what we need.
I mean, it would be great if that's what it is. I think that brought one other thing in with me. I taught a class. It was probably right after COVID, and I had I don't know, 20, 22 people standing around me in a big circle at the end of class. And I was explaining a few things, and I said, "Hey, let me say it this way." And I said, "Raise your hand if you have a knockout punch." And that's a loaded question because of who am I punching? But generally speaking, you know whether you have a knockout punch or not. And like 6 people raise their hand, and I'm a pretty upfront, sort of matter of fact person when it comes to Krav Maga. And I said, "All right, put your hands down." I said, "None of you have a knockout punch." And I said, "There are 2 people in here that have a knockout punch, and neither one of them raised their hand." Right. So the point is, on top of all the things people are dealing with on the internet and trying to understand, is it the defense, or is it the system, and what are principles, and what do the layers mean, and how do I interpret all this? On top of all that, we have the stories they tell themselves about their capability, good or bad, and we have the stories that people are telling them in an asymmetrical environment, information environment, about what works and doesn't work. And it's no wonder people are wildly and hopelessly confused.
And that brings me to exactly what I was thinking here, and maybe what we can wrap up on is it's really hard to say or to criticize or to judge or to know without experiencing it. I can't tell you how many times I've encouraged someone to try out Krav Maga, and they had all their own stories in their head about what it was or what the training was going to be, and maybe they were nervous or afraid or thought they would get hurt or whatever it is. And overwhelmingly, almost every single time they try the class, they experience the system, and they're blown away. They're like, this is amazing. This is incredible. I had no idea that this is what it was. I can't believe I didn't do this sooner. And that's what I would encourage people to try is like, if you don't know or you don't believe it, go to your local Krav Maga school, find a Krav Maga Worldwide licensee or affiliate, and experience it before judging or asking all the questions. And keep the questions coming because we'll keep answering.
Yeah, I think the thing that you're alluding to that I wrote in the article is the only way to really judge a defense online for most people who don't have a real depth of knowledge is what the person's doing, making the defender safer or less safe, right? That initial response to danger. And I have to, I've trained with Boss Rutten before. I was in Phoenix with him for a week. It was a crazy week. He's a crazy guy. And I've been around Amir, who's a fantastic guy in Worldwide, and was with the Israeli Defense Forces and did all sorts of cool things for them. And Amir held pads for Boss and helped him get ready for one of his big fights in the UFC. And Amir tells this story after training. One day, Amir says, you should check out Krav Maga. And Boss says, what is it? He explains it to him. And he goes, see if I had it. He pulls out a training gun out of his, bag, his training bag. And he says, what if I hold this gun on you like this? What did you do, boss? What were we going to do, boss? And he goes, I'll punch you right in the face. And Amir's like, well, wait a minute. Like, if I pull the trigger, you're trading punching me, which clearly would hurt, for getting shot in the chest. And that's the kind of, like, you can judge that. You can go, no, that's not safe, right? So when I look at things online, I don't actually look at them in terms of like whether I like them or not, or whether I think they fit my system or my philosophy. I just think to myself, is this defense making this person safer or not? And I would say 9 out of 10 times it's just not.
Well, I really appreciate the time and being able to talk through this and jump into this with you, CJ. I think that I get a lot of positive feedback from people. They enjoy these conversations and they enjoy going in depth and hearing more about it. So thanks for taking the time to do it today.
Yeah, man. It's always good to be with you, Joel.
All right. See you next time.
Thank you for listening to the Krav Maga Worldwide Podcast. To access additional resources, read show transcripts, or to submit your questions and topic suggestions for future episodes, visit kravmaga.com/podcast.